What is it like, signing a player like Jimmy Butler? What is your responsibilities your day in getting that contract and now having to negotiate that contract for a player?
Yeah, like I would tell you from where I learned and where I began in my career, obviously like it's a different perspective for sure. You know what I mean? Like you're talking about Jimmy obviously is at a point in his career where he's operating from the top down. You know what I mean? It's like you kind of you're kind of obviously negotiating from a position of strength. But the thing for me that remains the same is like the people don't change. You know what I mean? Like he's a person. Like no matter the money, the contract, the whatever, the position that he has within the organization or anything like that. Like his day to day experiences of life come from a perspective of a human being looking out of his skull through two eyes. You know what I mean? Like there's the ups and downs that he has to battle to be able to maintain the position that he's kind of earned. And like any person that's ever been in the NBA, what's the number one thing you want? A little bit more, right? Like, and that's just the reality of being a competitor. So from learning like through like your experience and just like experiences of everybody that I've worked with, I understand at this point maybe how to navigate different situations, and just understand like, okay, what's the thing that we're going to do to kind of try to help you to lock into whatever your process is, strip away all the nonsense, and just deal in reality. And it's the reality you create, not so much that gets created for you. Because like at his level, everything is conjecture. Everything's opinion, noise, and all these things. So how do you really like lock in and like shut off all of those things and live the life that you want to live, how you want to live it, and what you want to do.
So what kind of advice do you give Jimmy to do that? What kind of advice did you give Mike to be able to lock everything else out? What would you say to an athlete?
I mean, the biggest thing a lot of times that you can do is, in my experience, has just been listen. You have to put the work in to develop a relationship to where you can offer perspective that allows that person to be vulnerable. And that vulnerability only comes from people that you can trust. And if you have a person that you can trust, you can't always be the alpha. Like you can, but you have to be moments where to like grow, you have to explore like some uncomfortable things within yourself. And you have to be comfortable enough to look to somebody and be like, you know what? Everybody always assumes that I have all the answers, but I don't. So let's work through this so I can actually get to an answer before I just put my head down and run through this wall and make this so much more difficult. So in my position, I can't tell you what to do. I can't take credit for anything anybody I've ever been around has done. Like, I don't know how these guys do these things. Like, I don't know how Mike did what he did in his career. I'm with Jimmy like a lot. I watch him play basketball as much as anything in the world. I do not know what it is about him that when a game like gets to that point of someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, he gets to the best of himself. I don't know how he does it. You know what I mean? Like I can't explain those things, but I can explain to you what work looks like. Like I can explain to you what preparation in August looks like when no one's paying attention. Like I can explain to you what creating a process looks like that you do all the time when nobody's looking. That's the way you stay normal. So no matter how much you outside of your house might be nice, but you're still doing the same workout within that house. You know what I mean? So I can do those things. But no, more importantly, it's like I've learned with my career, the most important thing is being where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And it's the gift of developing that relationship and just being there to offer a perspective. You know what I mean? If it's 3 o'clock in the morning, it's like you've got something you want to say. Like, okay, I'm here. What do you want to talk about? I can't give you the answer, but I have learned with athletes that they'll figure out the answer the more they listen to themselves speak. So you got to give them a forum where they'll speak openly and honestly, so they start figuring their stuff out.
Bernie, what's more difficult? Is it more difficult dealing with the player or dealing with the front office?
Oh, front office, 1,000%. Because I always know what the player's motivation is. You know what I mean? Like, what's the player want? Player wants opportunity. Player wants consistency, and the player wants to be able to sink or swim based on their abilities. Right? From a front office perspective, you're dealing with 10 different points of view. So you got the owner might think something. It could be something as simple as like the general manager's wife doesn't like, you know what I mean? Like the way that they park in the parking lot, or, like you never know. Like from a player perspective, it's essentially, it's either yes or no. You know what that is. From the front office perspectives and the stuff that you don't know perspective, you're navigating so much just to strip down to create like a baseline of like, okay, how do we just create even opportunity here? Like, how do we make it about basketball? That's something you said all the time. Like, are we playing basketball? Are we doing something else? Like, if we're doing something else, then, it's something else. But if we're playing basketball, I got that. Like, I got that 10 out of 10. You know what I mean? So, yeah, no, it definitely is the front office perspective and all those dynamics.
So, can you tell us a story that you experienced with the front office? Are you allowed to share? Are these anything public that you could say, I had this interaction and I'll never forget it?
Man, I've had a bunch, like it can be anything from, it's either the really private ones, really public ones, like they're all kind of the same, because at the end of the day, like the thing I've always been really, really mindful of, like no matter who the player that I'm working for, like it's their opportunity. It's like their one opportunity, and the thing that I've noticed with the NBA, it's like everybody gets it, and you come from a perspective a lot of the times where you had the hope in your head, like, man, I hope this could happen, whatever. And then one day it does, right? And then that one day it does, the guys that I've noticed have started thinking like, okay, how do I keep this? You know what I mean? And you're constantly waiting for something to like kind of change around you. So I've always been very mindful of the experience of the person itself. So like the experiences that are more like public, like there could be the experience with Jimmy last year, like when he knew it was time for him to leave Minnesota, and like they didn't want him to go, so he had to show them they had to make him go. And like that was, that was unique. Like we talked about what he was going to do when he went to the practice, and then I happened to be in the practice facility, and Mike, you'll love this because it's Tibbs between us, right? Tibbs loves me. Like I would say, Tibbs is one of my better friends in the world. Like I've had the utmost respect for Tibbs, right? And he threw me out of the practice facility before the practice started. He made the security come up to me, and he didn't tell me, Tibbs is kind of passive aggressive, Mike. He wouldn't tell me, but he had the security come over, and he was like, hey, I hate to do this, but Tibbs told me you got to go. And I couldn't do anything but laugh. I just had to respect it, right? So I had to go, and I knew what Jimmy was about to do in the practice. So I had to go sit in a Starbucks across the street in Minnesota and wait for the practice to be done. And literally it was like 23 minutes. So I sit down in the Starbucks thinking like, man, I wonder what's happening. I'm looking across the street, like building's not on fire yet. Give it a minute. And I get a text message from the security guy, in Minnesota, because his stature was always with us, right? So it would be me, Jimmy, security guy. Security guy texts me, he's like, come to the parking lot. Like, okay. I go down to the parking lot, and Mike, you remember in Minnesota, everything and the practice thing was like in the underground, right? So I walk down there, and I come around a corner, and it's like, your generic office building, underground, like parking lot. And Jimmy's just pacing up and down, and he doesn't have a shirt on. And we're in Minnesota, and it's like, end of October. And he's just like walking around, and I'm trying to like joke around. I'm like, oh, like, where are they? Let's get them, right? Like, and the security guy kind of looked at me. He's like, not now, Bernie. I was like, ooh, okay. And I could just tell, like, he was just so like, because he just had the experience that he had in the practice. Now, I knew like we had lined up that he was doing a ESPN sit-down interview right after that we were going to. But yeah, no, that played out really publicly. I remember sitting in the car with Jimmy, and we were driving back to his house, but to do the interview. And I remember he said something to me along the lines of like, you think people are going to find out? It was kind of like, yeah. Like that was an interesting experience. And then, like with Mike, the entire time he was in Washington, like that last year he was in Washington, I learned so much from that year, Mike. Like you guys just trying to navigate and like balance that crew and like the things that they went through. Like you talk about anytime in basketball, you've done a little too much is when you come out of like shoot around and the media people there aren't just like the beat people on ESPN, but it's like CNN, like something is going wrong, right? Like you come to practice and it's Don Lemon standing there next to like, Woj. You're like, ooh, no, we did too much. Like, and for some reason in Washington, I don't know why at this point, with Mike, he was trying to find his footing like within the team. He wasn't one of the central guys, but for some reason, whenever it was something big, like in the NBA, they'll pull out 2 to 3 guys after shoot around and talk to media. And when it was big things, I would be like, hey, Mike, you want to talk today? And I'd be like, you don't ask him anything after the games and that, like, come on. Like, and Mike, of course, be like, yeah, I do. I actually really
I got
do.
something to say. Bernie, what is it like, man, selling yourself to new clients? How do is being an agent is a cutthroat business, and most people don't understand. This is not the money is great if you're able to get the clients, but at the same time the grind is real. So how is it what is your day to day when you're trying to find a new client?
I mean, at this point, I would tell you, knock on wood, hopefully it stays like this. Like, it's a little bit easier. You know what I mean? Like, it's easier from the perspective of, like, I have a track record that's kind of built, but it became easier based on the track record that I built with you. Like, people knew, like, you had, like, one of those careers, and you were, like, one of those kind of, like, no-nonsense guys. Like, I'll tell you, like, a great story. Mike, might not even know this story, but with Jimmy, he told me this story, like, a couple years after I had him. So when I signed Jimmy, like he was coming off the Olympics, like he was, like at the height of his career, and he's still actually kind of building to that peak, but he was like, he's a top 5 dude. And I maybe always thought it in the back of my head of the question of like, well, what made you kind of choose me? But I was never going to be dumb enough to ask it until like we did the deal. So like after we signed his last contract, like, we had a couple of like celebratory like drinks or whatever. And I got the guts to ask him. And he told me a version of the story. Mike, this is going to literally blow your mind. So Jimmy is 31. So when Mike played in Houston, Jimmy would have been maybe like 14, 15 years old. And, Jimmy's background was a little bit difficult. You know what I mean? Like he grew up in kind of, non-permanent situations. And he has a brother. He calls his brother, it's essentially like a stepbrother. His name is Jermaine, and Jermaine's that guy that like can do anything. You know what I mean? You'd be like, hey Jermaine, we got to get someplace, but like, give me 15 minutes, I'll get a car. And you just don't ask the question, you just get in the car, right? Like that's Jermaine. So Jermaine comes to Jimmy, they're maybe 14 years old, and he's like, hey, I figured out how to go to Kinko's, and we can make family room passes for the Houston Rockets, and they'll let us go in the back entrance, and we'll just hang out in the family room, right? And no one's going to ask us for tickets. This is how we're going to get in the building. And Jimmy's like a rule follower, like how Mike is kind of interesting, like a rule follower, like to the T. So Jimmy's kind of like, I don't know. So he gets talked into it by Jermaine. So they go and they do this, right? First game they go to, if you ever go to an NBA game, when you go in the family room, it's very easy to pick out right away who's supposed to be here and who's not. And if you take 2 kids that essentially at that point are living in like foster homes, it's kind of obvious, and they're not there with any other adults, you're going to be like, these 2 kids aren't supposed to be here, right? Like you would notice it right away. So they get found out right away, right? And it's after a game and they're in the family room, and the security comes over to like grab them. Just at the time that they're grabbing them, this is Jimmy telling me the story, right? Just at the time they're grabbing them, about to like hem them up, Mike happens to be walking by. He's playing for the Houston Rockets at the time, right? So he's maybe in like his 6th year of his career. Jimmy's 14 years old, let's call it 15. And Mike sees the security, doing this to Jimmy and Jermaine. And Mike says to him, oh, what's going on? They say, and Jimmy says to the security guy, no, it's okay, they're with me. Mike doesn't know these kids for anything, but Mike's got a thing against authority to where when he sees like authority doing something to somebody else, he's like, you know what, I'll fix it. So he says to the security guy, no, these kids are with me. They're supposed to be here. So the security guy kind of looks like, oh, okay, cool. Walks away, leaves Jimmy and Jermaine alone, right? Mike looks at, signs an autograph for Jimmy, maybe takes a picture or something like that, keeps walking, walks to his car. Mike at the time had a Maserati. Jimmy tells me the story. He's like, I'm watching Mike walk away. 1, he saved me from getting in trouble, and I hate getting in trouble, breaking rules, whatever. 2, I watch him walk to his Maserati. And at this point, I look at the car, and he was like, for the longest time, I would tell you my favorite car in the world was a Maserati, because I watched Mike like glide over like on a cloud to this car, right? It's a 15-year-old Jimmy Butler. So from that point, Jimmy always had this attachment in his mind because of Mike, right? Because Mike did this for him, and he would watch Mike's career or whatever. And then, you know, the way life works out, years and years later, he ends up on an NBA team with Mike, right? And this is the battle that me and Mike went through to get him back on the Bulls and everything. Now he has another agent when he starts his career, but he always had in his head, for me, without me knowing it or knowing Jimmy, that because he had this background with Mike, he always thought people that were around Mike, because he believed Mike to be a good guy, which obviously he is, they had to be good people too. So when I started to have the conversation with Jimmy, and he was like, "You're Mike James's agent," he remembered this story from when he was 14 years old. And he was like, "Well, you must be a decent guy." Like that's how that came together, because Mike doesn't like authority. That's what changed my life. Thank you, Mike.
Hey, you tell Jimmy he still owe me for my teeth. Just saying, just throwing that out there.
Tell him a story. So real quick, the story was Jimmy actually in a drill or something.
No,
What happened?
Okay, I'll say this because he didn't ask. This is the last thing, Blee. I appreciate you for coming, but you got to give your best moment that you had with me, you and I.
That's Mike James moment.
Okay, so Mike, when he comes to Toronto, he got traded by Houston. They trade him. This is like cold-blooded. Now, like me knowing like how the NBA works, they traded him after media day, which is like, you know you're going to do this. So you wouldn't make somebody stand up, do media, take all your pictures, film your little dumb promos for the things you're going to do in February. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Toyota Center. My name is Mike James. Today's Easter. Like, you wouldn't do that because you know you're about to trade this guy, right? Like, that's cold. Like, you're not supposed to do that. So they have him do all this. They trade him that night. Comes to Toronto. When he got to Toronto, and the first quote he had, and they caught him I don't know how they caught you in the airport either. Like, who sends a camera crew to the airport? But they caught Mike in the airport about to fly to Toronto. And his quote was, you know, at this point, because Houston was home, his wife was from there. He'd been really good for them in the playoffs. He played in the Katrina game. Like, he was about to like get a foothold there, right? And then they trade him to Toronto. Like, he doesn't, at this point, Toronto's not Toronto. Toronto's like Siberia, right? So he's in the airport. They ask him about it, whatever. He's like, you know, I've learned that the NBA is a business. And at this point, for the rest of my career, I'm playing for the name on the back of my jersey, not so much a name on the front. Like, you talk about like a quote, like you said the quiet part out loud kind of thing. Like, that was it, right?
Should have kept to myself.
Yeah. So when Mike ends up in Toronto, like, he played with that edge all year. And that's why I always say, like, you know, people will say it's a double-edged sword. We're like, no, it's a sword. You know what I mean? Like, you can't say the things that made you great also like made you bad, because you never would have been great to begin with. So like with Mike, that like chip on his shoulder of having something to prove, that's what fueled him to everything. You know what I mean? And if he didn't know how to turn that off, man, I'd rather have a person that doesn't know how to turn it off as opposed to not know how to turn it on, right? So when he came to Toronto, every single day was like, I don't like you. Every game, I'm going to show you. I'm going to run through you. I'm going to do all these things. So the first time when he's in Toronto and he gets the chance to play Houston, the team that traded him, Jeff Van Gundy, right? That traded him. He was looking forward to it, would be the best way that I could say it, right? He gets into the game, whatever. He's like kind of like half asleep, like not half asleep, but not like playing with that same, like, you know, like, hey, something's wrong with Mike. Like, don't give him any more Red Bull kind of thing. And something happens in the game. He gets an and one, going to the basket, gets an and one. I think he had like 7 points, you know, 3 assists at times in like second quarter on Juwan Howard. Him and Juwan Howard were actually pretty close. Ball goes through the basket. Mike turns and says something to Juwan Howard along the lines of like, and one. And I don't remember what came after that. It was a bad word. And Juwan Howard was so like caught off guard that first, this is his friend that said it to him. And the word he said, you don't say to other NBA players, right? So he takes the ball and Mike's like standing there in front of him and mushes Mike with it. And like hit him like in his, like hit him in like his chin, his gum like fell out his mouth, right? It made Mike so mad, right? They threw Juwan Howard out of the game. Mike somehow gets to still play in the game, which was kind of amazing. Mike kills the rest of that game, has 38 and 8. It was like one of the first times in his career he got really close to a triple-double. He's in the locker room doing media after the game, and I walk down and I see the security guy, and I say to the security guy, I'm like, hey man, when you see Mike come out of the locker room, from the point of us being in the locker room to the car, just don't let him out of your sight. And the security guard, it was his first year. He only did it 1 year in the NBA. He didn't really know, like, you know, the way like the NBA works. He was a Toronto cop. He looks at me, he's like, why? I'm like, just do it. Like that thing that happened in the game, as much as like everybody feels like Mike forgot, he hasn't. So he's showering as fast as he can. He's going to come out here and try and find this dude, right? As I'm saying this to him and he's trying to tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, from behind me, I just hear all kind of commotion. Turn around and look, who is it? Mike and Juwan Howard in the hallway, right? Trying to get after it after the game. The one person trying to calm the whole thing down, Dikembe Mutombo. He's standing there looking at the both and he's going, listen to me, listen to me. And when he realized they weren't going to listen to him and they were going to do what they wanted to do, he was like, you know what? You both are idiots. And he walked away.
Hey, it's hard to take Dikembe serious in an argument because his voice only goes to like 3 at the highest pitch. So it's like he's whispering at the most. And so it's like, whatever, Dikembe, like nobody. But you know what's funny about that one is when Juwan first, I remember subbing out the game. And he subbed me. I was coming back into the game, and I was sitting on the sideline, and I was thinking, "What's wrong with me, Mike? I got to get ready. I got to get into the game." And then Juwan was like, "Mike, you a B. You ain't this. You ain't that." And I looked and was like, "Juwan, you know me." And when I went to the basket, I said, "Okay," and I said, "And 1B," and he said, "What you say?" I said, "And 1B." And when he mushed me with the ball in my mouth, I said, ooh, that's going to be on SportsCenter tomorrow. That was the first thought that came to my head. And I wanted to spit my gum at him, but the best thing about it was I remember hitting a 3 in the corner, and I looked at the bench, and I said to everybody on the bench, I dare one of y'all to finish what he started. And then, I walked Rafer up the court, dribbling the ball between my legs, and I shot a 3. And I looked at Jeff Van Gundy with like the meanest look on my face. But the funny thing is, if Juwan didn't do that to me, I probably wouldn't have had the game that I had because I was so lethargic and my nerves were so bad. And you know what's interesting? I'm going to finish with this, Blee. I appreciate it. But the interesting thing is, when I first got traded from Houston, every day, I used to walk into the tunnel going into the practice facility, and I used to always look at the retired jerseys. And I used to always say, my jersey's going to be up there. Every day I used to do it. And I used to believe that my career was going to end in Houston. And when Jeff traded me, I remember I was driving Amaya. She was maybe 3 years old at the time, and we was taking her to daycare. And I was in a car, and I'm angry now. And first of all, Jeff called me and he was like, yo, we just traded you. I said, traded me? I was like, for who? I was like, where am I going? He was like, you going to Toronto. I said, who you trading me for? He said, Rafer Alston. I said, and who else? And he said, that's it. I said, are you serious? Like, I just knew you threw in 3 lottery picks and a couple of first-round draft picks for me, but obviously he showed me I wasn't that valuable. But then I remember being in the car, and I was just angry, and I said to Angela, I said, I can't believe every single time I try to get, take 2 steps in this game, it's always somebody trying to pull me back, and I don't understand why I can't get around that hump. So I was tearing, and I started crying. And I could remember Amaya went just like this. She said, Daddy a crybaby. Daddy's a crybaby. Daddy's a crybaby.
Your daughter said that.
And I looked at her with this look on my face, and the only thing I got from that was her saying, what are you crying for? Man, go to Toronto and go handle your business. Don't even trip about what happened here. And that's the reason why it was from that moment, when I wiped my eyes, it was from that moment I said, you know what? I ain't playing for this league no more. I ain't playing because what they didn't understand was I was such a rider. I was such a, whatever piece you need me to be for the team, I'm going to be that piece for you. And no one was ever able to see it. So after that point, it was like, man, it don't matter no longer what's on the front of my jersey. Only thing that matters is what's going to be on the back of my jersey. And that's my name.
Pull up though, Tom. Pull up. I'll say this to you, right? Okay, so all of that happens, the perspective, how they trade him, like threw away like some garbage, whatever. The way free agency works in the NBA, it starts at midnight. In Houston, because it's an hour back, starts at 11:01. At 11:01, you kick off, you do whatever you want, right? First person at Mike James' store at 11:01 was as soon as free agency started.
Jeff Van Gundy. Jeff Van Gundy. And you know the funny thing, my wife and I took a 2-mile walk on purpose, knowing he was going to be there and we was going to make him wait longer. And the whole time we was walking, my feelings were hurt. Like, I couldn't even believe that he was there. He had me at hello. He knew the type of person I was. He knew the type of player I was. But yet for him to be able to disregard me and then come back to me like, hey, Mike, like, you know, no hard feelings, high five, you know, come back to the team. And it's just like, what you mean? Like now, and then they didn't want to give me a trade clause as well. So I'm like, wait a minute, you traded me whenever you guys wanted to the first time. So you mean to tell me you can't give me a trade clause to secure me coming back to the team? So I guess y'all just bringing me back to the team for trade purposes to make whatever value you're going to have in another player as trade. I was like, no, you're going to have to pay to trade me. And they was like, so then they made me look like the bad guy when I signed with Minnesota. Like, oh, you left a real good thing and you didn't. So everybody in Houston, whenever I came back to Houston, they was all like, oh, you left for the money and you think that we supposed to like you now? Like, get out of here. And I'm like, dude, oh, so y'all just, because I wanted a trade clause, I'm the bad guy? I was like, man.
And this is the other best part about it, okay? So he goes to Minnesota, wherever, ends up in Houston. Houston ends up being the team that's got to pay him the trade kicker anyhow.
So Bernie, we got to jump in here. This is going to be like a 2-hour podcast episode. And I got to be honest with you. If you're ever in Houston, would you please let Mike and I, or mostly Mike, take you out to a good dinner, okay? Seriously, this conversation has to continue. Has to.
We didn't even talk about All-Star Weekend in 06.
We're going to talk about that.
No, we didn't have no credentials the whole weekend, but we was able to go in every place that in the arena. No,
with like 14
this
people.
has been Mission Bound, and this has been Bernie Lee, one of the most interesting guys on the planet.
Thank you, man.
Mike, I love you, man. Nobody knows me if I don't know you. Thank you for everything you've ever done for my life.
100%, man. Appreciate you. It's the same thing, vice versa.
All right, fellas. Thank you so much, Tom. Have a great day.
Thank you, Bernie. Appreciate you. Wow. That was fun.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I keep saying that at the end of every episode, but every episode is so interesting in hearing your story, hearing Bernie's story, how they've come together, and how you went on the journey that you went on, and how it even led to Jimmy Butler's contract. I mean, it's just crazy. It's God, right?
Oh, of course it's God. You know, I think that all of it plays a purpose. And even me being traded from Houston, a place where I felt like this was going to be home, and then going to Toronto and meeting Bernie, and then us building our relationship from there, and not knowing how much of a intricate part he was going to play in my career. You know, it all goes back full circle, and God, his hand is, when his hand is in it, you know, we may think that we are the ones that initiating everything, but he's the puppet done played it. He's like the chess player that's 6 plays ahead of what you think that you're about to do. And so I'm just grateful to be able to acknowledge and understand his hand in my life.
Man, that's Mission Bound. A little bit of sports, life, leadership. And thank you for hanging out with us today. And man, what a great episode. We're having a blast here. We'll see you real soon. Have a good week.